Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's show is a double bill that I hope you guys will really enjoy. As ever, please do let me know down below in the comments what you thought. Please do like and share and help build this channel and community. And as you may have noticed, we are so close to 10,000 subscribers. It's incredible. Thank you all so much for the extra push and likes and comments. It really does help build our presence on the algorithm, the back end sort of boring stuff. Without further ado, let's get into tonight's story. A monster was obsessed with me. This is what happened. Let's get straight into that. Introduction to statistics is where this all began. One day, as I'm zoning out and staring at this girl I've been in love with forever. Maybe a bit creepy, but I couldn't help myself. I could never work up the courage to talk to her, so I just admired from afar. That's when I first saw it. Some movement out of the window catches my eye, and I change focus. Across the grass I see this thing that at first I think must be a malformed dog. It has no hair and black leather skin, and it has the shape of a human but is walking across the grass on all fours in a very unnatural way. Its hind legs raise up much higher than the rest of its body, while its front quarter hardly seems to lift at all. Its back feet look oddly human, but too elongated, giving it an odd, unnatural look. It seemed to be following some guy, keeping so close to him that I was shocked he didn't look back at the beast behind him. That's when it looks up and towards me and locks eyes. From where I was sitting, its eyes almost seemed pure black. I swear, it felt like it was peering straight into my soul, like it could see the deepest parts of me. It slowly started to approach the window, one step at a time. As it got closer, I could see its front paws seemed oddly human also. When I hear, "Mr. Matthews, if you'd please give your attention to me like the rest of your classmates, so kindly have. Maybe you won't fail this semester." I jump at least an inch as I turn around to face the professor. He was right though. I spent so much class staring at Lena that I was hardly able to keep up on the coursework. That night, as I lay in bed, I get the first chance to really sit down and think about whatever it was I saw today. I mean, it had to be an animal, right? Of some kind, right? It walked on all fours, but its feet seemed so human in an unnatural way. And it saw me looking at it and started towards me. Why would an animal do that? And that guy? He didn't even seem to notice anything. Right as I'm about to fall asleep, I'm spooked awake as I hear my closet door slowly open. I stare down at the foot of my bed, about ready to turn my phone's flashlight on and inspect whatever is going on, when I see something start to come out. Not on the floor like you'd expect, but on the ceiling. I saw those unnatural black, leathery hands start to come out of the closet, and then I see its face. Unnaturally lit up for being so dark, and the lack of light in the room. It had no nose, but instead just two elongated holes similar to what you'd see on a decaying corpse. As it continued to come out, I could see its abdomen was unnaturally long too, and the thing was way too skinny relative to its size, like someone who was starving. Then came out the feet. Black, leathery skin wrapped so tightly around the bone you almost think it had no skin at all. So unnaturally long, they reminded me of werewolf feet from movies, but were completely devoid of any hair. And it slowly made its way towards me. Our eyes locked together. I was barely breathing, and I was sure my eyes had to be unnaturally wide themselves with shock and horror. As it reached right above me, it turned its head completely upside down to where its chin was lined up with its back. Its neck started to stretch, and I could hear the cracking of bone as its neck stretched out to where its head was millimeters from mine. Its breath stunk of rot. Its eyes were pure black void of any other colour. Its teeth, they were practically knobs half the length of a normal person's, and were also razor sharp. "You can see me?" it asks, in a low, raspy way, almost sounding like Gollum from Lord of the Rings. It stretched out words in a weird way, like talking was hard for it. It repeated, "You
can see me.
Every word hit me with a stench of rot. My eyes were so wide they hurt, and I was no longer breathing at all. I had no clue what to say or do, so I closed my eyes and counted to 50 very slowly. When I opened them, it was still there. Now angrily, it rasped,
You can see me.
Frightened out of my mind, I instinctively whispered, Yes. With that, it gave the most horrifying smile imaginable. Its neck slowly pulled back to its body as I heard what sounded like more bones cracking. When its head was finally back in place, it slowly backed up to my closet, staring at me the whole way, and entered with the door closing on its own behind it. Needless to say, I didn't get a wink of sleep that night. However, emboldened by the daylight around 7 a.m, I got up and checked out my closet with a bat in hand. Nothing. And nothing looked out of place either. I was sure it hadn't left the closet, as my eyes were locked on it all night. Now, hoping it had all been some nightmare or trick of my mind, I got ready for class. I sat in class zoning out looking at Lena again, when something out the window caught my attention. I saw it again. It was slowly marching its way across the school ground. My stomach dropped in horror as it slowly made its way in the open window. One black leathery hand inside, then another, and then it did something very odd. Instead of pulling its torso in, its arms retracted like the neck had last night, which slowly poured the torso in. I watched in horror as it walked up the ceiling until it was crouched right above me. I stared straight ahead, now hoping to God it would just go away. I heard the sound of bones cracking again, and I knew what was to come. Soon the top of its head, then eyes, came into view. Once its head was level with me, it turned around again, so instead of its eyes being even with my mouth, its mouth was, and its eyes peered straight into mine again, giving that feeling of looking into my soul. It looked over at Lena and then back at me.
You love her, don't you?
I looked around as it finished. No one else seemed to hear this thing but me. I looked back at it, and angrily it says again,
You love her.
I gulp and give out the tiniest yes, so low I wasn't even sure I said it, and it smiled that rotten, disgusting smile again.
Yes.
And it said very low, even for it. It looked over at Lena very excited. Its head retracted back up to its body, and I watched as it slowly made its way above her and stopped. Its head slowly, bones cracking, descended down to where it was level with her, and it turned its head around again to peer into her eyes. She seemed to be completely oblivious to anything going on. After staring into her eyes for a good minute, its head receded again, and it made its way back to me. More cracking, and then its eyes peered into mine.
She doesn't love you.
It rasped very angrily, like she had committed some offence against humanity.
I'll make her love you.
And with that, its head receded faster than I had seen it do before, and it was across the ceiling and out the window before I could even process it. I didn't see the thing for the rest of the day, and by bedtime I was hoping I'd just imagined it all again. I knew after everything I wouldn't be able to sleep through, so I got to bed with the help of some over-counter sleeping aids. The next day, any hope of it being all imagined disappeared though. It was all around the school. Lena had been in a car accident and had broken her legs. My stomach dropped. That thing had seemed angry at her, but it wanted to make her love me. How would hurting her succeed at that goal? In intro to statistics, I stared out the window again, this time not because I'd been staring at the absent Lena, but because I had a feeling it'd return. My feeling turned out to be right. I watched it make its way across the grounds again, into the class and above my head. I heard the cracking of bones as I saw its head come into view.
I made her hurt. I will make her hurt.
It rasped. No! I exclaimed, which caused the whole class to look over at me. Mr. Matthews, Would you like to share with the class what's so interesting?" the professor asked. I shook my head. As he went back to talking, I noticed it was looking very angrily at the professor.
"I will make him hurt,"
it rasped before quickly making its way across the ceiling to right above the professor. Its arms extended down with the usual cracking of bone, and then it put one hand on each side of his head, and then snap! The professor's head turned 180 degrees. We all saw his blank eyes as he fell to the floor, dead. I didn't see it for the next few days, not until Lena was back in school. She was in a wheelchair with a cast on both legs. In an unusual act of bravery for me, I approached her. "Hey Lena, we have intro to stats together. Just wanted to say I heard what happened and I'm glad you didn't die," I said lamely. She gave me the most beautiful smile before replying. "It's no problem. You're David, right?" She replied with that same beautiful smile on her face. "Yeah," I replied lamely. I could feel my cheeks heating up just slightly. Sad to hear about Professor Johnson though. I hear it was some type of freak accident. His neck just twisted and broke in front of the whole class, she said, looking a bit sad. "Yeah, it was the strangest thing," I replied, feeling a bit guilty. Was his death my fault? I didn't ask for it, and I definitely didn't want it. That thing had done it out of some weird, misplaced anger for me. We parted ways, and I went about my day, hoping whatever that thing was, that it had its fill of me. I couldn't have been more wrong. That night, it entered my room again. I heard the closet door open. I watched it make its way across the ceiling. I heard the cracking of bone as its head reached mine, and I smelt its putrid breath as it rasped.
"She still doesn't love you."
I stared into my frozen eyes as it seemed to be contemplating something.
"I will hurt her until she does,"
it rasped. "No!" I exclaimed, coming out of my horrified daze. "I don't want you to. I didn't want you to hurt the professor. Just stop, please." I pleaded with it, and stared into my eyes again, giving me that feeling of it reading my soul. It didn't talk for a while this time, a few minutes, before rasping.
"But you love her. She must hurt until she loves you."
And with that, it made its way back into my closet, the door shutting behind it. With intro to statistics cancelled until further notice, I didn't see much of Lena over the next 2 weeks, but I was hopeful that Monster had heard my pleas and would be leaving her alone, and she didn't get into any more freak accidents. Of course, I would be proven wrong as I arrived at school one day to see Lena crying with some of her friends. I got close enough to overhear that her mum had died in her sleep. Apparently her mum had been relatively young and healthy, but her heart just stopped for no conceivable reason. It felt like my heart stopped and guilt racked my body. I knew what had killed her mum, and in a weird, sick and twisted way, it was my fault. This monster was going to destroy Lena, trying to get her to love me. Like it couldn't understand hurting her would in no way help that. It felt more like it was punishing her for lack of feelings. I had no clue what to do to stop it though. I had already pleaded with it. So that night, before lying down to go to bed, I spoke loudly and clearly into my room. "I want to see you tonight," and with that, I lied down and waited. It did not disappoint. 20 minutes after my room was black, it came out of my closet. I heard the cracking of bones as its head reached mine.
"Yes?"
it asked in a low, drowned-out, raspy voice. "If you don't stop hurting Lena, hurting anyone, because of me, I'll kill myself. I mean it. I'll load up a gun and blow my brains out," I said firmly to the creature.
"No!"
it shrieked.
"No! No! No! You're mine!"
It was so angry that it scared me, but I kept a firm resolve and stared it down. Its eyes peered into mine and I could feel it reading my soul. "Come on, you bastard," I thought to myself. "See that I'm not fucking around." It started shrieking in anger, making incomprehensible sounds. It shrieked as its head retracted back up to its body, and as it entered the closet, and once the door closed, I was met with silence. It has been 2 years since all of this happened, and while no one else has been hurt by it, I still see it every single day. I see it in the distance from me, on roofs, walls, in the grass staring at me as I eat at restaurants, when I don't open my closet at night because I know it's in there, watching, waiting. A cottage on the cliffs. Let's get straight into that. Absolute solitude could be a dangerous thing. The world away from the world holds a still, quiet warmth, the promise of a life without distraction and destruction. For some people, the silent embrace of solitude is a siren song that becomes harder and harder to resist the longer they spend alone, until they give in to it entirely, vanishing into the cracks of the world where such solitude can still be found. For me, that same siren song led me to take a 12-month job stationed at a small lonely cottage in Tasmania, miles and miles from the nearest collection of buildings big enough to be called civilization. Ever since childhood, I've always tended towards spending time alone, preferred the company of nature and a good book to the constant drone of humanity. People say I'm an introvert, but I don't agree. I just value peace in a world where peace is hard to come by. The feeling was magnified hundreds of times when I decided to leave my boyfriend of 3 years, a career-driven guy who had become more and more distant, while at the same time turning into an emotional manipulation to try and keep me from noticing. I needed a break from it all, and I felt like I'd find it on that isolated, rugged headland jutting out of the Southern Ocean. The cottage was tiny, utilitarian thing perched high on a headland in the southwest conservation area, the only access being ancient trapping trails and the odd surface road. It looked out over the savagery of the Southern Ocean as it smashed into the cliffs far below. A cosy retreat in the teeth of some of the wildest weather on the planet. My job was to monitor the seabirds that wheeled overhead and, in some cases, nested in the windswept dunes down along the bay. 12 months spent walking the beach and birdwatching sounded like heaven at the time. The pay was very reasonable, and I had a 4-wheel drive so I could make the trek north to Strathgordon or Strathan if I happened to crave some more modern comforts. As long as the data was good, no one cared about me, and I kinda liked that. I quickly settled into the rhythm, a monthly trip for food supplemented by fresh fish when I felt like fishing. Walks to the various seabird colony sites spread over the week. Lots of time enjoying the wild beauty of the place, or basking in front of the fire alone with my thoughts. It was energising, and all of my problems quickly felt like they were worlds away. I read and I wrote, and even took up painting, exploring myself in the moments between exploring the spectacular land around me. On my 5th monthly trip to Strahan for supplies, I was having a meal and a glass of wine in a pub when I struck up a conversation with a good-looking young guy. We hit it off nicely, and although I was happy with my isolation, it was nice to have a proper conversation and connect with someone. We talked for a couple of hours. I was surprised when he expressed concern about what I did for a living. "You should be careful, all the way out there," he said. "It's a different world. Things happen that have no explanation. People go missing and turn up places they couldn't reasonably be. It's not the kind of place to be if you're unprepared." We talked about Southwest Forest then, about strange lights and strange creatures and strange disappearances. In many ways, I think it fired my imagination even more, made me keener to explore this amazing place that I found myself in. We spent the night in my room, and in the morning, I promised to keep in touch, and he promised to tell me more about the wilderness that surrounded my tiny little home. Over the winter, I spent more time inside as the wind howled and the temperature plummeted. My new pen pal and I emailed each other once or twice a week, and I saw him when I stayed in town, but I still relished my seclusion and spent most of my time with myself. I had hoped to explore some of the mysterious phenomenon my new friend had told me about, but all I had managed were a few sightings of strange lights fitting through the thick forest canopy. Spring came, and I decided a lull in the weather was a great opportunity to catch a few fish. Winter was a thrilling experience, but the weather prevented me from fishing, and my food options were quite dull. A few fresh salmon grilled over the fire sounded incredible after months of frozen meat and carbohydrates that I jumped at the chance to throw out a line after checking the seabirds down by the bay. It was mid-afternoon when I noticed her watching me. I had ventured down the low end of the bay where the dunes gave away to the forest and had landed a few small fish already. Suddenly, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up and a chill ran through my bones. Tucked almost entirely behind a big tree, watching me from the shadows it cast, I saw a girl. She ducked out of sight when I first saw her, but I kept watching the tree and waited for her to show herself again. From her appearance, she was clearly indigenous and quite young, in her late teens I guess. The poor thing almost looked wild, and I wondered what she was doing all the way out here. I offered a wave and she cocked her head, quizzical, before dashing back into the forest. It was a strange encounter, but I thought surprisingly little of it. My friend in Strahan told me about communities of illegal trappers and hermits that lived way out here, and I knew that Tasmania was home to all sorts of loners and wilderness lovers who spent most of their time completely hidden away. I suppose that formed part of the attraction for an exhausted Sydney girl like me, and I just assumed that the young girl must have been part of a community like that. She seemed genuinely afraid of me, so I left a couple of fish where she had stood before. I left and headed back to the cottage. When I woke the next day, I found a leaf-wrapped parcel on the doorstep. Inside were bunches of herbs and scraps of bark, items which I had learnt had medicinal properties over the course of my cottage reading. I smiled at that, thinking that the girl had at least appreciated my olive branch and accepted that I wasn't scary. Over a few weeks, I went back to her tree. I never saw her, but I left small things for her. Old books, food, and the like. Sometimes I got something in return. Often I didn't, but that wasn't the point for me. I was just happy to share, especially because she might well have needed more than I did. 3 months later, in late spring, I was returning from another Strahan trip with food and supplies. I'd come to call them my Strahan trysts in my head. A little inside joke for one, because I usually met up with my mystery-loving pen pal. In a strange way, my visits both to the town and with him made me feel like I was cheating on solitude, the lover at home. Maybe the solitude had turned into something less desirable. I don't know. Whatever the case, that trip home changed everything. Maybe half an hour from the cottage, deep on a tiny service road so thickly forested it felt like an eternal twilight. A man dashed out of the forest. I braked, startled but not entirely surprised, given my earlier encounter with a young indigenous girl. I had come to believe there must have been some kind of small enclave out here, and the man appearing seemed to feed into that idea. He looked older and dishevelled, clearly a man who lived rough. I slowed both to avoid him and to offer assistance, before the look in his eyes gave me pause. He was wild, terrified, his eyes darting this way and that before catching sight of the car. For a moment, I thought he might run at me and try to get in, but he didn't. Instead, he cast a furtive glance at the forest behind him before looking back towards me. He screamed something that might have been, "Run, get out!" or "Run, they're coming!" before vanishing into the thick brush on the other side. I waited for a few moments, quite rattled and concerned for the man, who appeared increasingly in need of psychological help as the minutes ticked by and no one followed him. Of course, they could have seen my car and be waiting for me to go, or waiting for me to get out. I decided that getting to the cottage was the safest option for me. In all likelihood, the poor guy probably had some kind of problems, living out here to get away from it all. I called it in over the radio, and that was about all that I could do. In such vast wilderness, no one would go looking for a man who probably didn't want to be found. That night, I lay in bed when I noticed bright flashes of light coming through the curtains, like lightning ripping through the sky. Strangely enough, no thunder followed, which did strike me as odd enough to drag me out of my half-asleep look. What I saw was definitely not lightning. Over the forest, hundreds of lights danced in mesmerising patterns. They were white and red and blue and yellow, and they flew high above the trees and dipped right down, weaving in between them like sentient smoke. I stumbled out onto the grass, awed by the dazzling and completely unexplained display. It must have been only a few moments before I heard the screaming. Puzzled, I did something quite foolish, taking several steps towards the sound. My singlet and cotton underwear, I realised, were completely useless against sudden chill that seemed to hang heavy in the air. It had been a warm evening, and sudden temperature change is basically the norm in that part of the world. But this felt different. Not a breath of wind disturbed the trees as those lights darted amongst them, and the ground still retained the warmth of the day. In the forest, more screams sounded, agonised and despairing, and I noticed the sound of drums beating in the still night. Something was very, very wrong. I turned to run back into the cottage, maybe radio for help, and screamed in shock. Between me and the door stood a man, tall and menacing, in the garb of an indigenous warrior. His skin was daubed with body paint and held a long spear ready at his side, his expression one of stern hatred. How had he got there? I hadn't heard so much as a footstep. I raised my hands, half in peace and half in a plea, and took 2 steps backwards, stammering out some useless words. The man seemingly took no notice, just fixing me with that hateful stare. Something gave inside of me, and I turned to run, hoping to maybe lose myself down in a seabird colony or the rocks by the bay. I was confronted by an even more terrifying sight. As I had turned my back to the forest, it seemed that 100 warriors had made their way out of the shadows. They were also the source of the drums, and I realised that they were also the source of the lights. More of the brilliant orbs came down to earth, and as they did, became a proud warrior, joining the ranks of his brothers. They all fixed me with that same glare, stern, hateful, and unmoving. In amongst them, I noticed other people, some unmoving, some screaming desperately. All of them were strung up on long poles, hefted by 2 warriors, bloodied and beaten. As more warriors materialised, the men holding up one of the suspended forms stepped forward and calmly tossed their captive over the cliff. He screamed the whole way down. Those same warriors turned and fixed their gaze on me, rancorous and hungry. Without a sound, the warrior behind me had moved close, and he grabbed me as I turned to run, strong as a vice. I screamed and began to cry, overcome with terror and the fates that clearly awaited me. Suddenly, a breath of wind, and the drums fell silent. No. A voice, rough, strange pronunciation, but clearly female. The warriors who had thrown the man over the cliff halted their advance and looked unsure. The voice spoke again, firmer. No. This one kind. This one grateful. This one respect the land and the spirits. I realised, somehow, that the voice was not speaking English, yet I could understand roughly what was being said. Over my head, a brilliant red orb, by far the largest I'd seen, began to descend. When it touched the ground, the girl from the beach was standing in its place. No harm this girl. Let her go. At her command, the warrior holding my arms immediately released me, and I fell to the ground, sobbing and desperate. The girl smiled and appeared before me, seeming to cross the distance instantly. Sorry, no mean harm to you. You kind girl, respect the ancestors. Kind to me. She flicked her head to the poor people still hanging on the poles. These ones, not kind, not respect. Poison land, kill and spoil. These ones punish. I suddenly had a flurry of images in my head. Images of rare animals dying over days in agonising snares. Images of men beating and raping indigenous women. Images of ancient sacred sites polluted by laughing drunks. You not look, okay? A few of them still screamed on their way down the cliff. When I opened my eyes, all but a girl were gone. She looked sad, as though she regretted what had happened. My people, all gone. And still men come, men destroy. She must have been speaking her language, some power of hers allowing my mind to process the vague approximation of what she said. Men can come, it is okay, but men should have respect. Men should be grateful. You're always safe here, you have gift. Show kindness, even though no one asked. She stood and smiled, her eyes still swimming with an ancient sadness. Spirits keep land safe. Make sure men respect land. Do not fear. It is just the way. With that, she became light, brilliant and red, and moved off through the forest. I must have been in shock, because I lay on the grass until the sun came up. And when it did though, I was struck by how peaceful I still felt. It seemed as though the night before had been a bad dream, although the hand-shaped bruises on my upper arms assured me that it hadn't. The warmth of the rising sun on my face reminded me of the girl and her protection, and for some reason the best thing I could think of to do was to go about my normal day. Surprisingly, I sought out my contract. I moved to Strahan, where I run eco tours out into the great wilderness. It's just the right amount of solitude, I think. A little small town company and a lot of peace. I witnessed something horrific that night at the cottage, but I think understanding it made it less terrifying. This is a land of ancient spirits, and that night the spirits of the land extracted vengeance on those who had wronged them. Illegal trappers, criminals fleeing justice, and ignorant, callous people with no respect for the beauty of this place. So I leave you with a word of warning, as do my clients. Go out into the bush, enjoy it, and do not be afraid, just so long as you remember to pay your respects. Wow, fantastic stuff, both of those short stories there. Thank you ever so much to the authors. Do take time to check out their wonderful Reddits. I'll leave the link for that in the description box below. As ever, guys and girls, please do let me know what you thought of those in the comments below. Please do like and share, help build this channel, help us smash through that 10k target and on to 20 even sooner. I hope you're all well and happy and having a wonderful week, and above all, remember, be safe, not sorry.